We are honored to have Dr. Ali Salman, a renowned economist and policy expert, for joining us today as our guest speaker. Dr. Ali Salman is the founder and executive director of Policy Research Institute of Market Economy, PRIME, which is an independent economic policy think tank. He is the former CEO of Institute of Democracy and Economic Affairs, Ideas, Malaysia. Author of Islam and Economics, a primer on markets, morality, and justice. Policy advisor with expertise in long-term planning, economic governance, data policy, and more. Dr. Salman will share his insights and expertise with us today, providing valuable perspectives on the reforms and reliefs that are necessary to drive economic growth and enhance the overall business environment. Following his remarks, we will have a Q&A session to address the queries on budget. Now, I would like to hand over the session to Dr. Ali Salman by welcoming him on the stage.
Assalamu alaikum and Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. There are many generations here together. I'd like to also welcome my mother. She is here visiting me here. I thought I'll invite in. My son Muhammad Ali is also here. So very different generation experiences. My mother, she was a teacher, college level teacher, and I'm sure that she is very keen to see you all here in how education has changed maybe in last 40, 50 years. So thank you to School of Economics, and thank you Dr. Tariq and Dr. Fatma. We'll see here. And Qaeda University. I studied at Qaeda University, but I did not study in this department. I studied in the Business Administration department. I must confess that when I studied for my MBA, economics was my least favorite topic, subject or course. And I thought that was back in 1997 when I graduated, that I'm not coming back to economics in my life now. But it so happened that when I was doing a job at Planning Commission, I was actually not interested in business. I was more interested in the public policy. So even after my MBA, I went to public sector. So I joined Planning Commission, and I developed interest in economics and public policy while working. Without a formal knowledge of economics, I must confess. I got a scholarship to study Masters in Public Policy in Netherlands, and there one of the subjects which I studied was economics for public action. So that was, I think, the turning point. That is, I'm talking about year 2000. And at that point, at that Institute of Social Studies, I decided that, okay, if I were to study one subject with depth, it will be economics. And then over the years, I've studied economics at different level, including a doctorate from University of Bath in economic governance. So the different, but my interest in economics has been its interface with the policy. So economics and policy. So economic not just as theory, but economics as policy. And that's why and that was my motivation actually, to start a public policy think tank called PRIME. You might have seen some of its publications and reports, or might have attended its events. Dr. Tariq Majid has spoken at our previous national debt conferences. And we're also going to, sign an MOU with your school very soon. So in today's, it's less of a lecture, more of a discussion, I would say. And so I think I'll initially set the tone of basic principles and facts in terms of budget. I'm not going to present any numbers to you. I'm going to just talk about certain principles. And I think in the discussion, we will open up for discussion on the actual budget, the processes or the trends. We all know that, of course, the budget will be out in about 1 week time. So I think the budget will be released, presented on 12th. So I'm not going to make any predictions. But remember one thing as economists, which should never do is to predict anything. Economists are very bad in predicting. Economists are only good at analysis and developing an understanding of why certain events have taken place, creating link from different data points. And the ultimate aim of a good economist is to then critique a theory or develop a theory. Right? So that is the ultimate aim of an economist. So I'm not going to predict what is going to be presented in the budget, but based on what I've seen over last so many years in terms of the budget, I'm just going to present my main understanding about how budget works and how should we view the budget as a document. Okay, the first, I'll present you some facts here. And the number one fact is that budget is essentially a document of public finance. It's a statement where government presents its estimates of expenditure and income. It's not a document for the entire economy. It's not a document where we can claim that since government is or should be at least a small part of the economy, government should not be the total economy. So whenever we view the budget, we should just critically look at the budget as a yardstick or as a measure of how government is managing its own finances. It's not a comprehensive economic plan of any kind. It's just a 1-year statement of expenditures and income, right? However, of course, if you are not being responsible in budget preparation as a government agency, then it will have an impact on the economy. We will see it later on. Just to give you a small number, actually I'm going to ask you, any estimate of how many total workforce, what is the total workforce we have in Pakistan? The total number of workforce right now.
30 million. 30.
Not bad. Yeah, the latest is about 80 million. So maybe the employment ratio, if you take the official employment ratio, it is 7 to 8%, but then youth unemployment is very high. So maybe that will be the right number, maybe about 70 million. And how many people does the government of Pakistan employs? The government, as in all agencies, all the government departments, out of, let's say, 70 million people who work in Pakistan, how many people work in the government? About 2 million. That's all. Out of 70 million workforce or people who are in the employment in Pakistan of any kind, just 2 million people work in the government. So it means that the bulk, bulk of the employment, significant bulk of the employment is created outside the government. It's the private sector, it's the firms, it's the labor, it's the services, and so you see all across you. So it means that this budget, which is going to be presented next week, is going to be essentially a document of how the government is going to manage its own machinery. So it needs expenditure. Of course, it needs the income to sustain this machinery. Let's say 2 million people, but then in terms of the fiscal impact, it's quite significant. According to latest numbers presented by PIDE, the total expenditure on salaries, on pensions, civil, military included, is more than 6 trillion rupees, right? So it's a significant amount of money which the government is going to spend, as opposed to, let's say, the number of employees, which is not so huge. So that's the first fact. Budget should be looked at only as a public finance document. Second is that taxpayers finance the government, but they have very little control on how their taxes are spent. Taxpayers include those people who are filing the tax returns as an income tax or sales tax. And taxpayers also include those people who are not filing returns but who are paying taxes nevertheless. So they're all taxpayers. Right? So if telephone users and mobile phone users in Pakistan are, let's say, 120 million, all of them are paying some kind of taxes, right? Although they are not directly involved in as a tax. But usually they do not have control on how their tax money is going to be spent. It's the government agencies, it's the ministries, it's divisions, it's the departments, including universities, of course, which are part of the federal government or provincial government, are going to decide how much budget is going to be spent, what roads need to be developed, what infrastructure needs to be developed, which departments we want to be closed, which department we want to start. So it's all the government agencies. The third is that the budget is influenced heavily by special interest groups and lobbies influence and lobbies. Now, what do we mean by the special interest groups? Now, obviously, whenever the government is going to announce budget, there will be pressure from, let's say, different industries to reduce some taxes, to impose some level of protection, increase custom tariff on some products, or give certain kind of relief. So that's the usual pressure. Also, when it comes to, since Pakistan is practically an IMF program, so IMF would also bring its own set of demands, right? So how much taxes to be raised? What kind of taxes should we raise? What kind of expenditure should we allow? What expenditure we should not allow? And then, of course, there are political influences. There are state bodies. There are state functionaries, which then exert their own pressure on the government to shape the budget. So that's important, the role of the special interest group. Fact number 4 is that budgets are usually incremental in nature and they may not be output related. So in terms of the budget processing, normally the Ministry of Finance would pick the last year budget, and they will not exercise like an evaluation of what is going right and what is going wrong in terms of the budget spending. They are just going to do incremental budgeting. So हम 10% बढ़ा देते हैं, हम 5% बढ़ा देते हैं, हम 5% कम कर देते हैं, 15% बढ़ा देते हैं, हम salaries बढ़ा देते हैं, हम pensions कम. So this is all incremental, and very little, if any, effort is made in terms of evaluation of how the money is going to be spent and whether this is the best use of the money or not. Budgets are incremental and they are not output oriented. There have been a lot of attempts in recent years, especially by the donor agencies, to convince the government of Pakistan go into what is called output-based budgeting. So government agencies are expected to narrate what is going to be the result of the budget. कि budget spending होगी तो उसके end में आपको क्या मिलेगा. लेकिन since we are down to very basics now, and almost 90% of whatever budget we are spending is on current account basis, not on development spending. So at the end of the day, we are restrained to actually be incremental in our approach and not output. And fact number 5 is that budget should not be looked at as a growth document. So a lot of expectations we build from the budget, that once a budget is announced, it will unleash, let's say, era of economic growth. That is not going to happen. budget is a 1-year cycle, and for growth, you need a long-term plan. Budget is not a long-term plan. Budget is just a 1-year statement of how a government intends to raise its funds and then spend the funds. So to expect that the budget will help, increasing the growth level, would mean that we are associating wrong expectations with the budget. So these are some of the facts, but I thought it is very important to make them clear. Now, while we have discussed some of these facts, where are the principles? What are the principles for the budget making? Later on in the discussion, we will come back to these points, and you can comment or ask whether these principles are being followed or not. That's the whole idea of this exercise. So first of all, we need a balanced budget. Very simple idea. When you are in a household, or if you're running a business, you would never want to be in a situation where you are in a permanent debt, right? So if you are earning, if you're asked to maintain a household budget or a firm, you would always want to be in a slight surplus situation where you can save something. So same applies to the public finance. An ideal budget is a balanced budget where the government is able to balance its income or expenditure according to the income. Now, obviously, that's an ideal statement that hardly ever works anywhere in the world, right? So, but when we are setting principles, we are setting some level of benchmarks so that against those benchmarks, we can see where do we stand, right? So that's why, for instance, there is a measure of how much fiscal deficit is allowed. So you often hear this word fiscal deficit, right? So fiscal deficit comes from the idea that, okay, in an ideal world, we should be balanced, but we know that we do not live in an ideal world, so how much deficit should we allow? So, in economists, IMF, etc., have this definition of maybe 4% of GDP is allowed as a reasonable deficit. I tend to agree that some level of deficit may be indispensable, but I would like to see a government which is moving towards balanced budget. Right? So this is what is actually we have made in our own constitution. So there is a constitutional provision which is called Fiscal Responsibility and Debt Limitation Act 2005, which makes it compulsory for the government of Pakistan to move towards balanced budget. And to ultimately, in a few years, that was planned in 2005 that we will move towards balanced budget. It has not happened, obviously. Currently, we are around 8% of the deficit. The fiscal deficit is about 8% of GDP, which has only increased in last few years. So government spending is the main cause. Now, there are two views on this aspect. One school is that, okay, maybe we're spending too much in terms of our current or development spending. The other view is that maybe we are not earning enough. We are not saving enough. Let's say in terms of our income, in terms of the revenue, that's where we want to go, but we are not going to actually minimize those expenditure. We are going to raise the income. So I think that's the level of the balanced budget that we all need to follow, that Pakistan or any government for that matter needs to follow the balanced budget. Whether we are doing it or not, that's a question we will come to it later on. Now, a very important principle of the budgets, right? So budget, when we talk about, when we talk about expenditure side, you will talk about the tax regime, right? So we want to have a tax regime which is uniform in nature. What do we mean by a uniformity of tax regime? Currently in Pakistan, we do not have this uniformity in tax regime. So different kind of incomes are subject to different level and different rates of taxation, including there are some incomes which are not subject to any tax at all. So agriculture income, for instance, is not subject to at least the federal government. So uniformity of tax income means that regardless of the source of income and regardless of the sectors in which you are working, you're working in industry, in services, in firm, in agriculture, the level of taxes, whether it is direct tax as in income tax or indirect tax as in general sales tax, custom duty, you should be paying same rate of taxes. So that is extremely important because then it will mean that we are giving this sort of as an incentive to the worker, to the businessman, to make maximum profits, and our decisions of consumption and income should not be based on the level of taxes. So गवर्नमेंट की करती है कि गवर्नमेंट बहुत दफ़ा में ये आपने सुना होगा कि गवर्नमेंट कहती है कि जी हम टैक्स हॉलीडेज दे रहे हैं, इस सेक्टर को हम अगले 25 साल के लिए टैक्स एग्जम्पशन दे देंगे. What it creates distortion, right? So it creates certain level of distortion in the businesses. It creates also problems in terms of government's own accounting, and then the investor is then obliged to take a decision based on the tax saving rather than profitability. So profits should be driven, should be the driving factor for any business, not how much taxes it saves. So uniformity of tax regime is another important principle. Third related idea is that good budget should be incentives neutral, or it should not have any incentives at all. Again, you will see that in each budget, different sectors, different industries would approach the government, and they would demand that we need incentives, we need tax exemptions, we need lower taxes, we need some support, we need some subsidies. So these are all incentives. So my view is that the government should not offer incentive to any sectors. Again, let the sectors and let the companies, let the firms within those sectors compete with each other and not be driven by what kind of incentives are there. Because once you introduce the incentives, it sets the process of lobbying, of approaching the government, of rent seeking, and ultimately, of course, of corruption, right? So if the incentive is announced in the government document, then it will mean that, politicians can be approached, ministries can be influenced by the influential interest groups, which I mentioned earlier. So budget should be incentives neutral. And then the principle of transparency. So we want to hear a budget which is transparent in nature, which means that government should be revealing the total expenditures and source of income in a very clear and clean, accessible format. The information should be easily understood. It should be accessible to media and public, so that people can look at the information and analyze the budget document and make their own opinions of it. Of course, because it doesn't happen normally, government tends to hide information, sometimes behind complex presentations, sometimes in thick documents. So we want an openness and we want transparency in the budget making. And the last point here is that we want a predictable budget. So when a budget is announced, it is meant for 1 year. It means that within 1 year, the tax policy, the expenditure statement, there should not be much, there should not be any changes in that. Unless there are emergencies like natural disasters that could lead to other situation. But we would expect no change in the budget during the budget cycle. So that's very important. If we are bringing those changes, then it means that, again, the level of inconsistency, the level of lack of stability would be there, and it will then create problems for all, including the taxpayers, including the tax collectors, and it will be problematic from a public finance point of view. Okay, I finished a bit earlier than I originally planned, but I wanted to present this as an initial thought on the budget and its processes. But we can open the discussion in terms of what are your thoughts, questions. It can be on any of these principles. It can be on the budget indicators, or generally I would also encourage it if you want to relate questions with the overall economic situation.
It's a very bad state of poverty around Pakistan, with probably making a guess 175 million.
So why the government is taxing the poor people?
Yes.
Okay. Because the rich people do not want to pay their taxes.
What? Why not?
Okay. Related in terms of indirect taxation and direct taxation. Right? So whenever we have more direct taxation, indirect taxation, the burden of the tax would fall more on the poor or the low income rather than the people who are earning the income directly. Especially when the tax base is narrow, then obviously people in, let's say, in the salary in this salary base, but also in terms of consumption, they'll be forced to pay more taxes. Right now, we have about 70% of the taxation in the indirect mode, but that does not mean that all who are paying taxes are poor people. Actually, one key challenge is that almost 55% of our taxation revenue comes from imports. Right? So we have custom duties, we have advanced, we have additional customs duties, we have additional regulatory duties. So Pakistan collects 55% of its revenue from its import, right? And this can be compared with the world average of 5%. So while the world collects only 5% of its taxation from the imports, Pakistan collects over 50%. So that's a major anomaly that we face in terms of the taxation. So they're not necessarily poor people. Increasing the salaries of government, that's a sure thing. That is something you can always predict, that there will be an increase in the salaries of the government employed. Right? What is the principle of an increase of salary from an economic theory point of view? But the counterpoint here is that just by the experience, let's say in terms of number of years spending in a job, would you expect automatically the productivity to increase? So that is what normally applies to the government sector, public sector. Number of years spent means more experience, and the expectation is then to build into more salary or more income, right? So that may or may not be true, because ultimately productivity is how much better you can work in terms of the quality of output. It's the result. It's not just experience. So I would say it's maybe a very small component of the productivity, but not the complete story, right? So that's why you would want to talk about knowledge spillovers. You want to talk about technology. You want to talk. So that there are so many other factors which then affect the productivity, but not just experience. Yeah. The underlying question of any growth is that whether that nation or a firm, for that matter, has increasing its level of productivity or production. So ultimately, if the productivity and production is not increasing, then you would expect to happen. Typically, because inflation is looked at as a monetary phenomena. So when you just index the salary raise with only an inflation, it will actually lead to more inflation, right? So it will not it will not be able to compensate the level of inflation. Maybe in a very short run it will happen. Maybe in 1 year cycle you will see that. But imagine, let's say in the case of Pakistan, what is happening, that our real income has not been increasing, although the nominal income is increasing, but the real income is not increasing that much. Why? Because if you look at our production, if you look at our exports, they are not increasing. So it means that when you are increasing their salaries just on basis of inflation, it will not be able to certainly counter the problem in the long run. In the short run, it will happen, where in the long run, it will induce more inflation.
Somebody talk about the alternative world, no? So is it a misperception that you're taking budget as a health phenomena for young people? So then how the project will shape it in budget planning while reporting?
So it's a good question. So when I say budget, so budget is not a long-term policy goal, right? So I said that budget cycle is just for 1 year. But obviously in each budget cycle, you would hear about projects which can last 5 years or 10 years, right? And that is where we talk about development spending, PSDP program. So what usually happens is that we want to allocate a budget. We want to, of course, then let's say if you are talking about a long-term project, then it is not possible to complete the budget, that project in 1 year cycle. So you tend to allocate it over, let's say, next 5 to 10 years. But that is a small component of the budget. The main component of the budget is usually the salaries, and also non-salaries expenditures, which are not development oriented, but they are meant for maintenance or operations of the organizations. So 80 to 90% of the budget remains short-term in nature, and maybe the development spending is more long-term. But that again, the way development spending is designed is not linked with let's say an explicit growth target. It is linked with the spending target. Some of it may be related with the, let's say, the regional disparities we want to talk about. It's what is happening in Gwadar or Sindh versus, let's say, development in Punjab. Some of it may be driven just by the political considerations. So a government may be interested in in launching huge infrastructure projects without looking into the long-term impact on the budget itself. Now, one fact here is that what we call as throw forward. I don't know if you have heard of this term, throw forward, in the public spending, especially on the development sector, is the amount which is due to be spent to complete the projects in the pipeline. So we started some projects 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 5 years ago, but now we want to complete them. And that cost over, and because we have spread the completion cycle too thin, that has about already run more than 10 trillion rupees. So we have those projects which keep on increasing the cost because we are not able to complete them on time, and we want to then increase the allocation, and that is the further problem which will then impact the budget.
So basically about that part that you said that 55% of the Pakistani revenue comes from imports. This is purely correct. Like for example, my friend told me that the latest labor icons are only for a limited time, but this is wrong. The Pakistani government is only going to keep them just because they're doing good in sales.
Okay.
I also have another question.
Okay, quickly.
So this is related to principle one. Do you think Pakistan is moving towards a balanced budget? If yes or no, how?
Okay. Right. Sorry? Economics में admission. No. The answer is that Pakistan is not moving towards a balanced budget.
How?
Pakistan is moving away from the balanced budget because Pakistan is spending much more than it is earning. The level of expenditure is going at a faster speed than the level of income. So that's why we are ending up the higher level of fiscal deficit.
कि आपने कहा था कि जो बजट है वो एक
इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ की पॉलिसी नहीं है।
जी।
लेकिन हम जब देखते हैं बजट को तो उसमें हम देखते हैं कि गवर्नमेंट जो है ना सब्सिडीज भी दे रही है, एक सेक्टर को
जी।
एनकरेज करती है, दूसरे को मतलब कुछ सेक्टर होते हैं उन्हें टैक्सेस बढ़ा देती है। तो इस पे आप क्या कहेंगे?
Ji, so my view is that that is how normally the budget is presented. So we talk about sectors, we talk about, that's why you rightly picked up this point कि subsidies होती हैं, incentives होते हैं. So my view ये है कि ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए. Government को sectors selection नहीं करनी चाहिए. So that's a question of industrial policy. It's not just specific to the budget, fiscal policy, that's a larger question of the industrial policy. So let me spend a couple of minutes on that note because होता यही है कि जब भी हम expenditure allocation की बात करते हैं, especially businesses की growth की, तो हम बहुत सारा तवक्कुआत वाबस्ता करते हैं गवर्नमेंट से. So there used to be a time in industrial policy, in especially 1960s and 70s, when governments, especially in the Asian economies, there was a sector selection like semiconductors or auto or other, let's say, fast moving consumer goods. But let's say in the case of Asian tigers, it happened. But all those economies, while they were supporting some sectors by subsidies or by incentives, they were also very disciplined in terms of the output. And उनके जो exports linked थे, exports targets थे, वो काफ़ी strict थे. So उन एक्सपोर्ट्स टारगेट की गवर्नमेंट उनसे रैशनलाइज करती थी कि जी अगर हम आपको कोई सपोर्ट दे रहे हैं तो आप मान लीजिए एक्सपोर्ट बढ़ा सकते हैं या आप कोई ब्रांड इस्टेब्लिश कर सकते हैं. अब this was called, let's say, the nature of the industrial policy has changed drastically now. So from a vertical industrial policy which was sector specific, we now talk about a horizontal industrial policy. What is a horizontal industrial policy? That instead of spending money in one sector or another sector, we want to spend money in, let's say, the skills or research. So those kind of support which government can provide, for instance, in improving the intellectual property environment for industrial sector. So that kind of spending, which is not, as I said, it is not driven by sector, it is not driven by any selection of any particular type of business, is still welcome. And government can or should spend that level of money to induce competition, to induce, the innovation. So give you another example, in case of Pakistan's own history. So we have spent a lot of money, taxpayers' money, in protecting the motor sector, for instance. So by essentially tariff protection. हमने tariff, जो import tariff बहुत high रखे हैं और उसका मकसद ये था कि we will be able to produce maybe one day cars at a cheaper price, but also will be able to export the automobile. But in last 40-50 years, we have failed in that, right? So the price of an automobile car has only escalated, quite significantly. लेकिन इसके मुकाबले में अगर आप मोटरसाइकिल की प्राइस देखें, that's my favorite example when it comes to the protection. So motorcycle was freed from the protection in 2001. So 1998 में when I bought my first Honda CD70 motorcycle, it costed me about 70,000 rupees. 70,000. And in 2018, the same Honda CD70 was still selling at 70,000 rupees.
40 years now.
Yes. So how come Honda motorcycles, same motorcycle, same company, same brand, और $60 का था, अब $150 का था in 2018. So how come the Honda company was able to sell and still make profit, right? So they would not sell in a country which is not giving them profit. only because government stopped doing all kind of protection and government opened up the licenses. So there were 30, 35 other companies which government allowed to create, to manufacture, to assembly, basically. And the motorcycle prices were reduced to about 25,000 rupees at one point. 25 से 30,000 रुपए की नई मोटरसाइकिल अवेलेबल थी आज से कुछ साल पहले. अब थोड़ी महंगी हो गई ऑब्वियसली, डिप्रिसिएशन स्पेशली एक्सचेंज रेट काफ़ी ज़्यादा, लेकिन ये कि फॉर लॉन्ग टाइम हमने देखा कि ये हुआ. सो ओपन कॉम्पिटिशन हेल्प्स अ लॉट. एंड दिस इज हैपन इन पाकिस्तान. आई मीन हम वी कीप ऑन क्रिटिसाइजिंग कि गवर्नमेंट में कुछ भी नहीं हो रहा है, लेकिन आई ऑलवेज ट्राई टू ब्रिंग सम गुड एग्जाम्पल्स फ्रॉम द पॉलिसी सक्सेस ऑल्सो, which I think we all should remember. So we're not applying it. Another sort of, अगर आप मोबाइल फ़ोन की देखें कि अब हमने मोबाइल फ़ोन को प्रोटेक्ट करना शुरू किया हुआ है पिछले कुछ सालों में, और हमने कहा था कि मोबाइल फ़ोन सस्ते हो जाएंगे और हम इनोवेशन में जाएंगे, लेकिन ये है कि अब दैट्स नॉट हैपनिंग. हम एक बिल्कुल एक कम्प्लीटली नॉकडाउन प्रोडक्ट को हम इम्पोर्ट कर रहे हैं, असेंबल कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उसमें कोई वैल्यू एडिशन नहीं कर पा रहे. But we have made the mobile phone usage much more expensive than before. So this an auto policy repeat part too, I would say, instead of learning from the motorcycle industry. So I think that's a long answer, because then I wanted to spend more time, because that usually triggers in for each budget. हर budget में यही होता है कि कुछ ना कुछ sectors आगे आते हैं और वो कहते हैं कि जी आप हमें incentive दें, लेकिन मेरा व्यू ये है कि नहीं देना चाहिए. आप ओपन करें, आप प्रोटेक्शन ख़त्म करें. और ये जो हम पता नहीं आप लोगों को निशान ना बात सुनी हो, लेकिन डॉक्टर तारिक आपको याद होगा कि 2005 में ये कहा जाता था कि भी हम साइकिलों से हमने सफ़र कर लिए मोटरसाइकिल की तरफ. सो देयर यूज्ड टू बी लॉट ऑफ साइकिल्स ऑन द रोड विच वाज देन मोटरसाइकिल. सो दैट्स एक्चुअली ट्रू. ये कोई ऐसा नहीं है कि पाकिस्तान में ऐसा नहीं हुआ. पाकिस्तान में इकोनॉमिक प्रोग्रेस हुई है सेक्टर के अंदर. नाउ वी सी मच मोर मोटरसाइकिल्स because they are more affordable.
So you talked about more than 70% जो है वो indirect taxes है.
जी.
तो ये इस पे कोई पॉलिसी है कि हम indirect taxes पे progressive tax लगाएं? अगर नहीं है तो क्यों नहीं है? इसकी रीज़न क्या है? अगर है तो
सो एक तो मैंने ये कहा ना कि इनडायरेक्ट टैक्सेस पे हमारा जो मेजर एम्फेसिस है वो ये है कि उनकी कलेक्शन आसान है. स्पेशली जब मैंने इंपोर्ट की बात की ना, तो इंपोर्ट की आप एस्केप नहीं कर सकते. ज़ाहिर है आपने आपका जो 80 to 90% आपकी जो इंपोर्ट्स हैं वो नॉन लग्जरी नेचर हैं. आपको इंडस्ट्री के लिए चाहिए, आपको इनपुट्स में चाहिए. तो फॉर इम्पोर्टर्स इट इज़ इम्पॉसिबल टू skip paying some level of taxation at the level of import. So it's that enforcement issue, which then makes it easy for the government to collect the taxes in an indirect manner. Also, consumption can be easily taxed. Income are hard to tax, right? So that's world over, by the way. And one problem in our regime is the progressive income tax. That also makes more harder to capture. So I'll spend maybe a couple of minutes there. So in Prime, we often talk about flat tax rates, flat income tax rates in particular. So we say that instead of having different income slabs for different income groups, maybe we should introduce a single rate of tax. It is progressive in the nature, because still you will be, if you are earning more, you will be paying more in terms of absolute rupees, but you will be, of course, paying at the same rate. We believe that people who with the high income have more capacity to actually evade income. They can, they can engage lawyers. They can change their tax status. For instance, in Pakistan में जो most of the high net worth individuals हैं, they are no more in Pakistan. Physically, they may be in Pakistan, but in terms of their tax status, they are not present in Pakistan. So if you spend more than 6 months outside a country, typically you do not remain a tax resident of that country. So they are moved to Dubai, for instance, or other jurisdictions, because we keep on increasing the rate of taxation. एक इसकी मिसाल super tax है. So हमने आज से 10 साल पहले super tax लगाया. आर्जी तौर पर लगाया था, कहा था कि जी कोई फ्लड्स को रेस्क्यू करने के लिए और नेचुरल डिजास्टर्स को मीट करने के लिए, लेकिन we never took it back. Now we have almost practically made it a part of income tax slabs. So this is unfair for those who are earning, and that's why I think we are actually losing out that tax base in the country. So I thank you all. I'll be happy to come again to the school and have more discussion. But I thank Dr. Tariq and the school for this opportunity.